I didn't press record. So good morning, everyone. It's Louisa. I'd pressed live then, and I'd forgotten to press the live button. That just goes to show that I've had the summer off pretty much from videos. I get started, forget to hit live, so it goes out. Never mind. We're here now. So I've got my lovely compadre Rick Pursell, fresh and present for us from Bali. How are you, Rick?
I'm doing fine. I'm not sure about the freshness, but present and yes, loving our life in Bali. In fact, this morning I went to the immigration, and
Yeah.
I virtually have a lifelong PR status for Indonesia now. So that's
great.
another feather in the cap.
And how long have you been there? I mean, it's over 10 years.
15.
Definitely.
We built the retreat center and moved in 15 years ago. So it's quite a while.
Wow, that is a long time. And given that you do so much, or that you've done lots to sort of be part of the community there, you'd have thought that might have happened a little bit sooner than that.
Yes and no. You really have to build up. You get what is a work permit. You have to have that for a number of years. Then you can go on to slightly more permanent one, and you have to have that for a number of years. And now I became eligible for the lifetime membership, whatever that means.
Membership. That sounds really good. I'm just realizing this little comment I'm putting in the chat room. My typing whilst listening to you is really rubbish, but anyway. So
looks good to me.
So we're talking about trauma today, and actually while I was getting ready, I was creeping around the house because it's 6:30 a.m. here in Portugal, and I don't want to wake up the little ones. So I was like creeping around, doing my hair and whatnot, cleaning my teeth, and I was thinking, what kind of trauma is there? And I was thinking, when did I actually have trauma? And then I was asking myself, was it really trauma? You're like going into it. And I realized that apart from maybe one really or two really shocking events that I've had that I think are traumatic or were traumatic, most of the things that I've experienced that I've later thought of as being traumatic were actually situations that kind of crept in, and then all of a sudden it was like, whoa, it's almost like it's almost like I felt like I was a little deer being stalked by a lion or something. So I realized that there are different types of trauma. And so I guess my first question is, what's your definition of trauma? And
right.
What can we do with it?
That's a good start, isn't it? And I came equipped with that because it's such a big subject that I have a little cheat sheet here with me, and I'm going to read out some of it from the dictionary.
Okay.
And as a noun, using the sentence, the trauma of divorce,
Ooh.
trauma can be shock, and we're really talking about mentally and emotionally traumatized.
Okay.
So it can be a shock, an upheaval, distress or stress, strain, pain, anguish, suffering, upset, agony, misery, sorrow, grief, heartaches, heartbreak, torture, disturbances, disorder, a jolt, an ordeal, a trial, tribulation, trouble, worry, anxiety, burden, adversity, hardship, nightmare. That pretty well covers the whole lot in terms of mental and emotional.
Yeah.
So that's one kind of trauma. And the other one is basically the physicality. So that's a traumatic injury or damage, or where we've hurt ourselves, been wounded, a sore or bruise, cut, laceration, abrasion, contusion, etc. So that's the physical side of trauma. And the previous one was the mental or emotional trauma. So when we look at that as a definition, that pretty well covers just about anything that we may have encountered in our life that would be labeled under trauma. A shock, some strain or stress that we may have had, in some short grief, heartache, heartbreak, all
Mm.
of those are lumped under the mental emotional trauma. So that pretty well covers all of it, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
I don't think anybody would be exempt from
Mm.
this. Now, of course, there's magnitude of it to throw in as well, right?
Also,
The
like the trauma of birth should be there as well for the mum and the child. I mean,
Yeah, and that would be physically as
yeah.
well. It's hurting.
Mm.
It's There is physical pain there. So I'm told. Right?
Mm.
I'm no expert on this.
Oh,
Haven't had any babies this lifetime, but I do know there is pain. I know because my wife had her arms around my neck, squeezing the
yeah.
last semblance of air out of my lungs. So
Mm.
I got to experience a little bit there as well, and
Wow.
rightly so too.
I
So,
think my husband once famously described birth as what it must be like to have a colonic irrigation, and took a bunch of mums and got a severe tongue lashing.
yes, yes,
So I guess seeing as trauma is so prevalent, given
yes,
that it has many words used to describe it, and it can be really caused through quite mundane things happening in our lives. But it's I'm guessing it's how we receive that, how we perceive that. What can we actually do? And what are the stages of trauma?
yeah, yeah. Well, Leah, let me think for a moment. Your question, what can we do? We probably jumped the gun a little bit, but let's
Okay,
let's
well, where
let's
would you
follow
like
it.
to go next?
No,
I'm
no,
happy
let's
to do a security
that's
through.
okay. Um, I think the first start is we need to accept that there's been pain and trauma, and not be running away from it and diving into comfort,
Yeah.
so that we are distracted from actually doing the inner work to resolve it. So acceptance with no resistance. Okay, I was hurting then. I was mentally disrupted or whatever it was. So we
Yeah.
then turn and face this demon or this shadow and say, okay, this is the reality. I have experienced this and I'm still carrying it around with me. So
Mm.
that's just acceptance
Yeah.
with no resistance and no denial, no running away from it. Because it's very human to want to dive into something that will give us comfort from this pain.
Mm.
Very human. We're
Yeah.
we're suffering the trauma, we're suffering the pain and the anguish in our life, and we don't like that. It's really jolly uncomfortable. So we don't like that. So we then find something to give us a modicum of comfort.
Mm.
And that starts with pain, and then the thing that gives us comfort becomes we need more of it. It's rather like a drug. We need more alcohol, more drugs, more validation, more likes on Facebook, more admiration, whatever it is.
Mm.
That then becomes an extension of the trauma. So first thing we need to do is go back and face this trauma and see it
Mm.
face on. See it for what it is. Don't make it worse, but just see it for what it is. And
Mm.
then clean that up. Allow some relief to come from that. I'm now taking ownership for this. Right? So once we've done some work on that, we've relieved the burden of mental anguish and the energy of that. And then the next thing, and now I'm virtually paraphrasing Gabor Mate, who we've spoken about in the past. We need to know what was the story that we built around that trauma, because that will keep the trauma in place, and the story will keep. Usually, it becomes more and more enhanced.
Mm.
So we've got a situation where, if it let me use my own personal situation, where I
Oh.
was sexually abused at 5 by a pedophile uncle. The
Mhm.
story that I wrapped around that, I did all of the healing on that. It took me about 30 years, but I did all the healing on it. But the story I wrapped around it was that, where were my parents? I'm not safe here.
Yeah.
There's nobody here to help me. And
Yeah.
I built this story around here that the world is a very unsafe place, and I'm going to withdraw myself from it, become very insular, fiercely independent, almost antisocial to some degree, because I
Yeah.
wanted to withdraw from that because, well, it's not safe out there. And of course, my parents didn't know that the uncle was a pedophile. So
Yeah.
how could they have protected me, not knowing what he was about? So they were doing the best they can with it. But you and I know that you can't wrap kids in cotton wool for the rest of their lives.
No, I do
So
try.
yes,
I get my cotton wool out every day.
so that story stayed with me for about 30 years, and that's what needed to be relieved, because I just took the trauma and rolled a story around it, and that had a profound impact on my life and how I lived my life until I relieved that. So,
Mm.
what do we do with this? We look at the actual physical, mental trauma. We embrace it fully, and then we relieve the charge that's around it. And then we look at what is the story that are woven around it. I'm not lovable. I'm never going to make it.
Mm.
People can't be trusted. Some people can't be trusted, but not all of them.
Yeah.
So then we dismantle the story and replace it with something much more closer to the truth, that I am lovable. That yes, there are people that can't be trusted, but the bulk of the people can be,
Yeah.
and whatever it is. So that's the process there. And of late, I have it has been coming up in the past, but really of late, I've been feeling extraordinary trauma and pain, and I've been perplexed by it because it doesn't feel like it's mine.
Mm.
I've spent a lifetime doing this inner work and direct self inquiry. And yes, you can skim the top off the iceberg and it
Yeah.
comes up for a bit more handling and you skim
Yeah,
that
it
off.
does. It keeps floating up, doesn't it?
Yes, damn it. And um, I've just been feeling this grief and sadness and despair and injustices and the inhumanity. And I'm thinking, don't know what's going on with this.
Yeah.
And I came across a body of material by Thomas Hubel, and he is talking about very succinctly about what I have labeled in the past the pain of existence, and that is that we as sentient being are experiencing all the pain from our ancestors and even from our DNA, half from mum, half from dad, going back and back. So
Yeah.
we've got a physical connection to the past and our ancestors, and we've got a mental, cultural aspect of our past that is embedded in our history.
Yeah.
So I'm going to come back to you now after that little rather long-winded introduction.
I didn't. Sorry. I didn't think that was a long-winded introduction. I think that was really awesome.
Yep.
I've written a couple of things down. The first thing that, when you were talking about one of the first steps that we come across in terms of trauma, and that is we need to face the trauma. And I was thinking about you as a 5-year-old child. For most of us, what we want to do is find comfort first. And you did actually say a few different ways that people find comfort first. And I would add sleep in there. The moment I hear about a trauma or experience something, it's almost like I shut off. I need to go into like a sensory deprivation. So I might have a couple of glasses of wine and then just go to bed and sleep and try and sleep it off, so that I wake up all of a sudden feeling fresh. And of course that never happens, but it's almost like I can't cope anymore, got to sleep.
Yes.
But in terms of a 5-year-old, like an adult might realize, okay, I'm doing something to prevent me from seeing and facing this situation. And they might realize that at some point they are going to have to face the truth of what's just happened. And I also equally recognize that I know lots of adults that don't. They have a trauma and they look the other way. It's almost like they reroute their life so they don't even have to look at the trauma. But in terms of a 5-year-old, they don't even know that they need to face it. That becomes even more insidious. Like as an adult, we might realize that there are steps that we take, but children don't know those things necessarily. How do you reach a child? Because the other reason I'm asking that is because I've done quite a few interviews with Robert Jardine about German New Medicine, and I've been really watching how German New Medicine plays out in my life and in the lives of people I talk to. And one of the key premises there is that any unhealed shock, i.e. a trauma, any shock or trauma that we don't get supported through, it makes a change in the way our body works. You know, we go into a special biological program that all of our fellow mammals do. You know, they have a certain sort of biological way of dealing with trauma and shock, like shaking it off or whatever. So if we can't reach our 5-year-olds or maybe our 8-year-olds or 10-year-olds even until they're able to recognize these steps, they could be going through lots of shock and trauma, and it could be affecting their health quite markedly. Sorry, it's not
Indeed.
but
No, it's very true, and it's a very
as a mum with 3 kids under 10, that's
yes,
a bit of a
you're well equipped to witness what's going on there.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Let me add another complexity to it. If we are suddenly shocked by the loss of a loved one, somebody is killed in an accident, we didn't get to say goodbye, they left in the morning to go to work or go down to the shop or whatever, and suddenly there's been a horrific accident and they're no longer on the scene. Those traumas, those painful incidents, filled with grief and sorrow and sadness, and then often blame, shame, and regret. Oh, I could have gone there, the shop, and done it. I should have picked it up on the way home from work, blah, blah, blah. But the instantaneous shock has a more profound effect on us than, let's say, a parent has a long debilitating illness and the prognosis it doesn't look good. We can prepare ourselves for their loss, and we can gear ourselves up for it and be ready for that day. Although, having seen a lot of death in my life, I'm not sure that we always are fully prepared for it. But at least we've had some preparation, and that we would be telling ourselves, look, it's pretty well inevitable that they're going to go. This illness is going to take them, or this injury is going to not be able to be healed and have a profound effect. So what we need to do then is look at what is the nature of the shock and trauma within our kids, right? And really get them to speak up about it as soon as possible. So how do you feel that daddy's not around anymore? How do you feel that mum's not here? Or whatever it is, just get some dialogue going so that they can start to piece together some rationale to it before the ego mind starts spinning its story about it, which is, of course, based on an untruth. And it's the blame, shame, and regret that the ego heaps upon us. I wish I'd been a better son. I wish I'd been a better daughter. I should have spent more time with them. All of that is coming from the ego, and that gets rolled into this profound narrative that can have an extraordinary effect on our lives. So, coming back to your question there, how do we deal with little kids? Just get them to talk about it, and maybe play acting, or using a little model. If there's some dolls or toys or whatever, just enact this, what actually occurred there, and have them relive it while it's still fresh. Of course, without interrupting the grieving process, and allowing them to feel sad and feel deeply for it, but rather than having an egoic fear feeling, but a real sentiment of this is how I feel about it. So asking the question, how do you feel about this situation? And how do you feel that it's having an effect on you? What does it make you feel? All the time trying to get them to get into the feeling out of the head and start
Yeah.
feeling what it is, and then being a very safe terminal to which they can come and talk about it. Mummy, I know you're busy, but I need to talk to you, and then drop everything and
And you're
give
with
your attention and be there for them, just
them.
listening to them. They're not broken, right? There's a reason, and they will see this as I did. There's a reason why this happened to me, and there's a reason why all of these things happen to us. Therefore, there is a reason, and that will unfold itself and become observable as we get older with more maturity. And if we are creating our reality, creating our future, then there's a very good reason why that unfolded. And when I look back on my life, I wouldn't change anything now. I would not change it. It's made me who I am today, and to be able to do the work that I'm doing. So there we are. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yes, it did. Thank you for speaking. Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough one to talk about so clearly and with so much articulation. Whilst you were talking about that, I was thinking about some people that I know that have been through some deep trauma, and I was thinking, I wonder how that would sit with them. I wonder how that would sit with them. I mean, my own response in trauma is, I should have done more. I didn't do enough. And even when there's a trauma that comes up that's not even directly related to me, I always somehow make it personal and think, what could I have done more of, as if I could have saved, saved a situation.
Yes.
I think I felt very shocked earlier this year when I heard of the very sudden passing of my friend's son. And I can only talk for myself. I mean, I collapsed and then just needed to go to bed. I just couldn't cope. And I think for me, the instant feeling of, oh my goodness, I just can't conceive of what happened there. And I don't know how long I just can't imagine what it must be like to lose a child so suddenly. And I wonder if you ever understand why that happened, or it's a really tough thing to put to you, Rick. I mean, I'm guessing you've probably worked with people who've lost children.
I have. And also I've worked with people who are suicidal.
Yeah.
So while you were talking, a quote came into my mind. We're always doing the best we can with what we've got. What access we have to consciousness at that time. Now, 10 minutes later, 10 days, 10 years later, we might reflect back and think, oh, I could have done this, right? Or I should have done this. But in essence, at the time, you did exactly what was required, perhaps, even if it was a reactive ego reaction, right? At the time, because we may not have had access to a heart-centered response at the time, so we reacted out of our ego. We were still doing the best we could with what we got. So I always fall back on that. When people tend to punish themselves, they've gone back into the story and I should have done or I could have done. And of course, the impossibility is that you can't change that now.
Yeah.
It's of no value to even ponder what you could have done, right? Because you can't do it,
Mm.
but you can do it for the next time,
Yeah.
right? So if I was to be faced with a similar situation, right, what would I do differently? Right? Now that is uplifting as opposed to punishing ourselves. I should have done this. I could have done this. There was
Mm.
an opportunity, but I didn't take it. That's taking us down the slippery slope of self-sabotage,
Mm.
and we really don't want to go there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for answering that. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I'm noticing at the moment is there are lots of people who are suffering very sudden deaths and passings. One of my neighbours across the road is, coming up to a year since her husband suddenly died in the night. And there's so I'm when you were talking about this sort of extra trauma that you're feeling and sensing in the world right now, you're recognizing there's something going on. When I speak to fellow empaths and people who psychically or emotionally or physically feel things that maybe are not theirs, there's definitely this like upswing. I've noticed it as well, this almost like despair, this despondency that washes over me sometimes, and I've no idea where it comes from. And in truth, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to take the summer off for a bit. It felt like there's so much, I don't know, I guess like fish, we have to clean the water sometimes. And, we're all swimming around in this collective air or this energy, and all the fish can feel it at some level. And I've felt like, oh my God, I need to get some more air. I also know quite a few empaths or very sensitive people who are just, and actually just there are lots of people now who are just kind of coming away from their usual lives and going into isolation or really changing their lives in some way, which I think is also part of this energy, this shift. People aren't quite sure what to do. And possibly because they can't face it, they're taking a step back. And maybe that's what helps them to face it. I don't know. But this isn't really a question so much as it is a long, circuitous kind of me thinking in real time. Okay, so when we I think one of the reasons that I haven't faced trauma in the past is this feeling that it might be too much for me, or that I can't cope with it. What are your thoughts around facing the trauma? Because I think a lot of people can put it off, thinking it might kill them to face it, that they can't.
Yeah, there's definitely a part of you that's going to die,
So is
and
it that
that's
part that's kind of keeping us from facing it?
yes.
All right.
What will die if we really do this and we're diligent about it and sincere about wanting to change ultimately our behaviors and our life quality of life and lifestyle, then it takes some courage and bravery to dive in there, and it takes some commitment. It takes some compassion for ourselves. It takes forgiving ourselves. It takes some humility. These are all the heart virtues that I've talked about many times.
Yeah.
So we have to muster up all of those and apply them to ourselves. But just coming back a moment, and I think I've talked about this in the past, but your mind is not your mind.
Mm.
It's the collective mind of humanity. So, um, in the Buddhist practice, they talk about having the right thought because every thought is going into the collective mind. And it's very obvious now and patently obvious that for the last couple of years, thanks to COVID, is that a lot of fear has been generated. That means that people are fearful of catching this disease, fearful of dying, fearful of going to hospital, fearful of lots of things associated with it, which has been carefully orchestrated by the mainstream media.
Mm.
Uh,
And
and
social media.
yeah, and so the collective mind of humanity has been bombarded with fear. Right? So if we are sharing that collective mind, then now and again somebody's going to pop into your mind that is not your thought. It's part of the collective mind. And what we need to, how we combat that is that we are very mindful of our thoughts, the quality of our thoughts, and raising the vibrational frequency of those thoughts so that they're loving and kind and compassionate instead of blame, shame, and regret and fear, so that we can actually transform this collective mind. Now, as an individual, uh, that's a formidable task. One person attempting to change the collective mind shared by 7.8 billion people, or 8.7 billion. I'm not sure what it is these days.
I'm not
But
even sure I believe all those figures anyway. I mean,
yeah, who's counting? Who's
yeah,
counting?
I see your point.
All right, a lot of people,
Yeah,
right?
more than me and you.
However, it has to start with us,
Yeah.
right? And then it will snowball. Random acts of kindness will snowball in our lives. So that's something that is under our control. If this is not my thought, and this is what we were alluding to at the beginning, where is this coming from? It's coming from the collective mind of humanity that collectively, since day one, has been collecting trauma and pain. And now, as we start becoming more aware of our own role in this play, then we start, as an empath, we start just tapping into this, and then we just need to recognize the difference. This is my personal story, my personal pain and trauma from this lifetime, and this is the collective pain of humanity. And that's what I've been experiencing over the last few weeks. Really differentiating, is this mine? I need to take full ownership for this if this is my pain. If it's the collective mind, I can process it through me, right? Because it's part of my mind.
Yeah.
Right? So I then pull out these elements that are relative to me or relative to my ability to heal, and I heal those. And you can see, if you get to a critical mass, this could shift the whole balance towards a better way of being.
Yeah. I really like that distinction. And going back to your earlier point that, we have a physical and cultural DNA or a link to the past, that we are carrying all this stuff. At some level, obviously we're connected to it. And if we're becoming more open and able to perceive more, we'll be able to feel more of it. I'm not entirely aware that, I can recognize when something isn't my pain, and I've been able to do that, I think, for maybe about 10 years or so. I've had this thinking, hang on, this isn't mine, and all of a sudden it was quite to realize that I was feeling things that really weren't my own. But if people are feeling the actual cultural DNA pain, but thinking it's their own, I would imagine that could really impact people in terms of whether they even want to stay in their body, in terms of suicide and letting go of their life. It feels too much. I had a moment in the kind of recent past where I thought to myself, gosh, it would just be really easy to sink into this bath and not come up for air. And afterwards, when I was thinking about the situation that was going on at the time, I thought, that doesn't match at all what I was feeling. And all of a sudden, this massive feeling of, oh my God, I just want to let go came over me. And it was like, I just want to release from this pain. And it definitely wasn't mine, but obviously in the collective mind, I was connected to it. So I guess, what I'm getting at is, if people are awakening at the moment, it is my perception that people are awakening to the fact that their reality isn't as they always knew it. And I think whatever's happened with COVID has really assisted us in this.
Yes.
because people's senses are starting to say, well, hang on a second, that doesn't make sense. Because a lot of people are able to, with cognitive dissonance, we're able to say, hang on, that doesn't make any sense. That we were all under this very strong brainwashing. And now what's coming up is people are actually able to, they're knowing that something's not quite right. And at the moment they have that thought, hang on, that something's not quite right, then all of a sudden it feels like they're able to have this kind of rational thought, and say it out loud. Oh,
Yes.
something's not right. And so they're connecting more intuitively. And of course, if they're doing that, they can then connect into the global trauma.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think the awakening process at the moment for people who are kind of taking heaven by storm, like awakening at this point, that must be highly traumatic for people, especially if they don't know that that's what's happening.
Yes.
It's a bit of a long mind thought there.
Yeah, no, it's it's very true there. Quantum entanglement means that we are all connected. Everything is connected. Quantum physics and quantum theory have validated that, what the sages of old have been telling us forever. So I know this is going to sound a bit odd because this is the way I used to speak, but
Say it anyway.
the universe seems to give us what we need, not necessarily what we want, what we need, and at the level of confront of it tends not to overwhelm us, although we can be overwhelmed, we can become overwhelmed by it, and that's usually a mental construct. But it seems that these lessons are dished out in increments that we can actually deal with it if we're prepared to, if we're courageous enough to turn and face the demons. And I don't mean to invalidate anybody that hasn't been able to do that by any means, but it seems that seems to be, if we take on these tasks, and I'm always reminded, big beings take on big challenges, right? They don't mess around with just the little stuff, right? They take on big challenges, and so there's people that are, struggling with debilitating illnesses or having all their savings wiped out, whatever it is. It seems to be the machinations of something that's unfolding beyond our comprehension and beyond our level of consciousness, that this is part of the process of our awakening. So if somebody is not so awake, they're probably not going to feel the full impact of this, whatever's arising at the time. That's just my perspective at this stage.
And also maybe they're built to deal with shock and trauma in a very different way to me and you and people who have been feeling incrementally for years.
Yes, yeah. And we know very well from our own personal experience in life that these challenges come to us, and if we ignore them or run away or deny them, then they'll just keep coming back until we turn and face them. So the answer is, don't wait, don't put it off until you have to, you've got a raging bushfire in your backyard. Do something about these small steps that you can do to prevent a runaway train that you have no choice but to face it full on, full impact. It's going to have a profound effect on you. And the main effect is that we've procrastinated doing something about it incrementally. And now the universe is saying, what do I have to do to get your attention? And of course, we are the universe cleverly disguised as human beings.
Wow. I don't know where to go from there. Yeah. I mean, there might be some people that that disagree with that, that they don't really feel like the universe described as a human being. Because I guess, I mean, if at some level you believe that, it might give you some comfort in unpacking your trauma. But for some people who are maybe atheistic, that might be. I'm wondering how they face their trauma, without that sort of understanding that there is a spiritual meaning behind things. We are meaning-making machines, aren't we? We are always looking to make meaning of things.
Yes.
And our ego really plays into that. And for people who don't have that as a meaning, that there is a spiritual glue that binds us all together, or that we're all in this, or that what is what's best, is a phrase that I use, when things get a bit hairy around me. I say, what is what's best? What is what's best?
Yeah.
Because it just is. You can't really fight it, can you?
Not really.
I don't always get the hindsight for a little while, and then later on I get, yeah, that was best. But for people that don't have that kind of belief system, it must be, it must add to the trauma somehow.
Well, possibly or possibly not.
Yeah, you're right.
And not to justify my perspective in any way, and I'm not certainly not that attached to that perspective, because we're in stages of growing, and our perspective changes. And I liken it to Google Earth. If you're looking a meter down on the lawn, that's all you're going to see. But as you elevate your perspective, your viewpoint, your point of view, you're going to see more and more of what's there by looking at it from a bigger perspective or so. But and I'm quite happy if people don't subscribe to that, and I don't know how it would be for, say, an atheist to be able to express what they think would be going on. But I do know enough that there's science through quantum entanglement, through quantum theory and quantum science is already validating that everything is connected. There is an essence that flows through everything. Einstein started treading that path by saying everything is energy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. Therefore, it is, and everything is that. And then we've got sages of the First nations that says everything is connected. All things are connected. Chief Seattle said that. So if that happens to be science and spirituality and mythology, and there is some truth to it, then nothing is separate. We must be the universe, and the universe must be within us.
Yeah.
And I think Rumi, really, his beautiful quote, "We are not a drop in the ocean, we are the ocean in a drop."
Yeah.
And that, to me, just spells it out. We're a wave in the ocean, right? We're not disconnected from it. Only the ego mind says, I am separate. And that is the bane of humanity. And now I'm separate from you, I can harm you. But that is a falsehood. It's an illusion. It's not a truism, certainly from my perspective. Others may see it differently. And that's perfectly okay as well.
I am in so much admiration for your ability to remember statements and things that people have said, and also who said them. I quite often have to Google. I remember a part of the phrase, but not quite enough to Google it and find out, and hope that whatever was written on Google was actually what was said. But yeah, I love how you summed that up. I really, really do. Yes, and yeah, I've read up about quantum entanglement and quantum theory and whatnot, and I can see that there are the scientific evidence and provings of what you're saying, and it sounds like I'm arguing for people to stay in trauma, doesn't it? Because I'm saying, what if? I love what you shared there.
Thank you. And I think I've said this before, that we're heading towards what appears to be heading towards what is called the grand portal, where science, spirituality, and art all concur and all say there is irrefutable evidence that we are spiritual by nature, that we are infinite consciousness having a human experience. And when we arrive at that point, when there's nobody contesting it, well, not nobody, but the bulk of people are saying, yeah, I get it now. Yes, there is a life force within us. I've witnessed dead people. There is no aliveness about them. And yet there is still a connectedness at a micro level, at a quantum level. So once we get to that point in the future, then I believe that we'll start to see that what I do to somebody else, I do to myself. Right? And why would I want to do that to myself? All right, if I honor and respect myself, why on earth would I want to do that to somebody else? When knowing that we are not separate from anything, we'll start to honor and respect the earth. We will honor the lives of other species, whether they be birds, animals, or fish. We'll honor and respect everything that is around us. So I think our lives will change dramatically when we arrive at that moot point, that convergence. And that's really is all my life about at the moment. Is just what can I do to contribute to that? In what small way can I contribute to that awareness that will take us to that place?
And that's why we're having these conversations, isn't it, Rick?
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. And I'm
So,
very honored to be part of it. Thank you again.
oh, likewise. Really, truly.
I think we're done.
Yeah, it feels like it.
It does,
It
doesn't it?
does feel like a kind of we're done point. And yet, I want us to come back there and kind of end here. But I also wanted to add in that right now I'm working with quite a few different people, and also know quite a few people who are going through a lot of life changes. And because we're sort of living in a different country, we're coming across quite a few people who have moved here and are moving back home. And I'm sensing this really big sort of like shift in the groundedness of everyone and where they're all based. And I've been refamiliarizing myself with the stages of grief. And they've come up, not necessarily in the same words that we've been talking about today, but they've come up, and in particular, looking at the Kubler-Ross model, you know, that when a trauma, because I think that could apply to trauma as well, which is a grief, isn't it?
Yes,
So,
it is.
you know, the acceptance with which we're talking about is at the end of a stage, although I think you can have probably all of the different steps within it, but we've got denial.
Yes.
You know, like where at first we can't even believe it's happened, and we go through this denial for quite a bit of time. Bargaining, which is what we were talking about earlier, you know, the I should have done more, or maybe I could, and replaying it in our mind. Anger about it. This shouldn't have happened to me. Why me? I can't believe this. It's unfair. I've got acceptance. I'm missing a step, aren't I? Can you feel me?
In fact, I've got it here.
I'm not surprised by that. Grief.
You know me. Give me a second. I'll see if I can, because I was just using it last week. Give me 2 seconds. I'll see
It's
if
really
I can pull it
relevant
up.
to what we're
Here we
talking
go.
about.
Okay, so where are we? Okay, so Elizabeth Kubler-Ross chains the shock, which is surprise or shock at the event. Then there's denial, as you said, disbelief, looking for evidence that it isn't true.
Yeah.
Frustration, recognition that things are different sometimes, and being angry at it as well. Depression, a low mood or lack of energy. This is where people want to sleep. They don't want, there's nothing to get up for. Therefore, I don't need to get out of bed. I don't need to comb my hair. I don't need to make an effort. There's no point. It's borderline boredom into depression.
Yeah.
Then experiment, initial engagement with the new situation. Now here's the doors of possibility.
This is an
Sorry?
updated version of it, isn't it? The original one
It
didn't have.
may be, yeah. I'll send this to you afterwards.
Yeah.
So
I
now
like this. It's got a sense of possibility.
yeah, the doors of we've been stuck on this now. This shouldn't have happened. Why is it happening to me? Denial, all of that, depression. And then as we emerge out the possibilities of something emerging. And this is what the old statement, every cloud has a silver lining. Right? So this is where we're starting to just emerge out of that heavy, depressed feeling. And then a decision comes next, learning how to work in the new situation, feeling more positive. We're now becoming a bit more uplifted. And then there's the integration. Changes integrated a renewed individual, which is what nature is doing, renewing and regenerating itself. So I'll shoot that to you afterwards. She was an absolute master on death and dying and grieving, and been a huge gift to the world.
Definitely.
So we can, particularly now we've been talking about trauma and pain. This would be a good one to just post underneath the video, or perhaps
Yeah, I will do.
just there's a very useful tool of knowing that at some stage I could feel very depressed and lifeless and couldn't be bothered. And now I'm watching for this happening, and I want to get through that, not deny it or jump over it. I want to feel that helplessness and hopelessness and feel that weight on my shoulder, so that then I can go to the next level and work my way out and integrate a new way of being and doing and having into my life.
Yes. And I love that you said that depression is a bit like boredom. I find the depression stage quite useful for me because it doesn't take me too long to now just get really bored of myself. And then I'm like, okay, right, time to shake it up.
Yes. Yeah.
Boring.
Yes.
But I have to get up absolutely thoroughly sick of myself. And then it's like, okay, time to wake things up.
Yeah.
Great.
You see also that trauma or a major event in our life can shake the very foundations of our life, like an earthquake, right? Where everything was stable and known and comfortable and familiar. All of a sudden, that's just got turned into a turmoil.
Yeah.
So that stable datum that we could rely on is now grossly unstable. And gradually we'll be able to stabilize this into a new stable datum that is working for us, so we can work our lives into, with that part that is missing, is still missing, but we can still create a solid springboard to reach higher states and better ways of being. So that's what trauma does. It just shakes the foundation of our life, doesn't it?
Yes, I also, as a last point before we go back to your lovely, beautiful acceptance, one thing that I notice is, in particular with the clients that I'm working with, is those that seem to create a lot of shake in their own lives don't seem to suffer as much greater trauma as the people who really want the stable datum and to be very, very settled. They are the ones, in my perception, who appear to be more suddenly shocked.
Yes.
And sort of using an astrological model, I can see when there are these phases of shock coming into people's lives, and so I often encourage them. It's like a flow of energy. Like if like when I was working on campsites in my 20s, like you might get a storm warning, and you know, those that don't prepare for a storm, they get their tent ripped down, blown away and whatnot. And I've seen that happen. I've been on a campsite in a hurricane. That was really fun, and really devastating for a lot of people. But sorry that it was so much fun for me. But as the storm was approaching, you know, you can dig a trench. You know, you can you can create a little bit of discomfort for yourself and use the flow of the water to do something. And then a really smart person, you know, if they know these things are going to be happening, they might use the sort of like traumatic energy or the storm energy to create a moat, but also have it feed off to something that you want nourishing with the water. And so if I see this kind of energy coming up in people's charts, I say, look, it's time. Hello. It's time to hello, my little. It's time to start using that energy and create a trauma. You're going to go to Rick.
Yes.
Hi. Were you worried about me? Is that why you're crying?
Hello, sweetheart.
Little darling Solomon.
Yes.
Who you are.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We can use that as a springboard. And I'm conscious of the time, but I practice dying. Right?
Do you?
Yes,
wow.
I do. It's absolutely inevitable that sometime this body's going to stop breathing, right? And I don't want to be traumatized by it. Doesn't matter what is the cause of this, my passing. I don't want to be traumatized. I want to be celebrating my life, and I want to be experiencing every element of it, no matter how painful it might be. Right?
Wow.
So if we are afraid of dying, we're not going to be living. We won't live. We won't go out on a limb. We won't take some calculated risks. We'll be trying to stay in our comfort zone. And for me, life begins beyond the comfort zone. I don't believe in recklessness, but I'm not afraid of dying because I've been practicing. What would it be like if everything dropped away, right? And to me, the beautiful analogy is we have snakes around our garden, and I see they leave their skin on the rocks, right? And I know there's a renewed and refreshed, regenerated snake out there somewhere that has just left this little coat that no longer served us. That's how I look upon death. And it's if we practice that, when the time comes, we'll be able to hold that space while everybody else in the ward or the hospital bedroom is frantically clinging on, trying to cling on, and I don't want to put people through that. I want to be a calming influence. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I don't know. I'll tell you when it gets there.
I mean, this conversation could keep on going. I would like to talk more about that. So maybe, would you be happy to talk about that with me next week?
Absolutely.
Like,
on death and dying.
Yeah, in a similar way, I practice birthing. I did a lot of sort of like mental work to ensure that the birthing was as smooth and easy as possible as well.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm very inspired by that.
Good.
And so this conversation has gone all over trauma, really, hasn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
So, from that beautiful definition of it being a mentally and emotional shock involving lots of different things that we could identify, like grief, a jolt, a trial, this, that, and the other. From you talking about your pedophile uncle at 5 years old, we were talking about the sort of physical and cultural DNA that we're part of, and the fact that we are also connected. Then Kubler-Ross. I swear that model has changed, so I'm going to post both of them in the show notes, because the updated it is so different to the one that I got. But I'll post both of the models that we're talking about. The model I was talking about, but the much better renewed one and reviewed one that you're talking about, and then the idea of practicing dying. I think this has been quite a big episode.
Very good, very good. Well, I'm dying for next week, so we can talk about it.
Okay, don't go anywhere. Okay, I'm expecting to see you next week.
Can't promise anything.
Well, yeah, I can't either, actually. I mean,
no,
none of us can.
We don't know what's going to happen. So.
No.
Very good.
And yeah, it's all about practicing to live freely, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, this guy wants a bit of booby, so
all right.
my moment to shift. So thank you so very much for being with us today. We haven't had any live listeners today, and I'm guessing it's because it's our first moment back after quite a while. But if you're listening in after, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any comments, please do put them in the chat box or the comments field in YouTube. And Rick and I will be very happy to get back to you if you've got anything that you'd like to share or comment on. And we look forward to seeing you another time. Once again, Rick, thank you so very much. It's been absolutely my pleasure.
It works both ways. So thank you. You stimulate the conversation with the right questions, and away we go. So thank you. Have a great week ahead, and lots of love from Bali to you and your family.
From Portugal to you and your lot. Yeah. Lots of love. Bye for now.
Ciao, ciao.